It started with just one question, asked softly, almost like it didn't matter. But by the time J.D. Vance stood up from his chair, the entire room felt like it was caught in some invisible pressure. Nobody knew what they'd just witnessed. The cameras were still rolling, but what happened in those final moments was so unsettling, so perfectly calculated, that the full footage was never shown to the public. What the headlines won't tell you is, this wasn't some heated, political debate. This was a trap. And the woman asking the questions? She wasn't just a reporter. She was a weapon, sent into that room with one mission: to break J.D. Vance's mind in front of the whole world without him even realizing what was happening. But here's where the whole story flips upside down. She failed, because what happened inside that room didn't just expose J.D. Vance, it exposed how the entire media system operates. Most people think J.D. Vance simply lost his temper that day. They think he snapped under pressure and threw a reporter out of the room. But that's exactly what they want you to believe. The real truth is buried so deep beneath this story that once you see it, you'll never watch another news interview the same way again. But before I show you the forbidden piece of footage they tried to bury, there's something you need to understand. The whole interview, every camera angle, every word, every silence, was scripted before J.D. Vance even walked into that room. The real story here isn't about what J.D. Vance said, it's about what he refused to say, and that's exactly why they erased the tape. But here's the crazy part. Even though the full video was wiped from the internet, we found something hidden deep inside the audio files, something that proves this whole event was a psychological operation disguised as an interview. And once you hear what was really happening behind those questions, you'll realize this wasn't just an attempt to cancel J.D. Vance. It was an assassination attempt, without a single bullet. But here's the part nobody has figured out yet. The reporter kept asking J.D. Vance the exact same question 7 times in a row. Why would someone repeat the same question over and over again in front of live cameras? Unless the real trap wasn't in the question itself, but in the way it was being asked. What you're about to see isn't just the breakdown of one viral meltdown. It's the blueprint of how the entire media system manipulates your mind without you ever realizing how you're being controlled. By the end of this video, you'll never look at a news interview the same way again. But first, you need to hear the question. To understand what really happened in that room, you need to know something most people aren't supposed to know. J.D. Vance isn't just another politician. He's a glitch in the system, a self-made outsider who climbed straight from the factories of Ohio into the heart of Washington, without ever selling his soul to the machine. The media doesn't just dislike him, they fear him, because J.D. Vance isn't playing the same game as everyone else. He's been quietly working on something behind closed doors for the past 6 months, something so dangerous to the entire media empire that they've been trying to destroy him before anyone finds out what it really is. It's called the Protect Free Speech Act. On paper, it's just a boring bill about censorship laws, but buried inside that bill is one hidden clause that could expose exactly how viral news stories are manipulated before they ever hit the airwaves. If that law passes, every secret psychological trick the media uses to brainwash the public would be exposed overnight. Now here's where the whole story flips upside down. The people who control the media don't attack their enemies with hit pieces anymore. They assassinate them with questions. And the woman sitting across from J.D. Vance that day, her name is Emily Rosen. She's one of those reporters whose face you've probably seen 100 times without ever remembering her name. But that's exactly what makes her so dangerous. Emily Rosen doesn't break stories. She breaks people. Her whole career has been built on one secret mind control technique buried inside CIA interrogation manuals from the 1970s. It's called the loop technique. Here's how it works. You take one question, you repeat it over and over again, slightly changing the wording every time. But the trick is, you never actually care about the answer. What you're really doing is slowly breaking down the target's brain, forcing them into a spiral of frustration until they either snap or accidentally reveal something they were never supposed to say. Emily Rosen has been quietly sent in to dismantle some of the most dangerous threats to the system without ever leaving. Fingerprints. She did it to Elon Musk in 2023. She did it to Joe Rogan in 2024. And now, They sent her for J.D. Vance. But here's the part nobody has figured out yet. There was something different about this interview, because J.D. Vance never cracked. What you're about to see is one of the only times in history where the loop technique was used on a public figure and completely backfired. But why would Emily Rosen repeat the exact same question 7 times in a row, right in front of live cameras? What exactly was she trying to force J.D. Vance to say? And why did every single headline after the interview focus on J.D. Vance losing his temper, without ever mentioning what the actual question was? Unless the real trap wasn't hidden inside the question itself. It was hidden inside the way the question was being asked. But what exactly was the question? Why would they go to such extreme lengths just to force J.D. Vance into saying one single sentence? And most importantly, what would have happened if J.D. Vance actually answered it? You're about to hear the full conversation, exactly how it happened. But once you know the truth, you'll never trust another news interview again. The air inside the studio was thick, not with heat, but with something invisible. That kind of tension you can't quite explain, but everyone feels without saying a word. The cameras were rolling, the microphones were hot, but for the first few minutes the interview was playing out like every other political conversation. J.D. Vance sat with his usual calm posture, hands folded, voice steady. Emily Rosen asked her questions like a polite professional, but something was wrong. If you pay attention to the first 30 seconds of that interview, you'll notice something most people completely missed. Emily Rosen's eyes weren't locked on J.D. Vance's face. They were flicking back and forth, from J.D.'s mouth to the producer, sitting behind the cameras, like she was waiting for something. What happened next would spark one of the most viral interview moments in recent political history, but nobody watching ever realized how deeply engineered the whole thing really was. The first sign was the loop technique, a psychological manipulation trick straight out of FBI interrogation manuals. Emily asked J.D. Vance a question about his stance on immigration. Nothing controversial on the surface. J.D. gave a calm, straightforward answer, but then, without skipping a beat, Emily repeated the exact same question, word for word. Most people wouldn't think twice about it, but what nobody realized is that this was the first layer of the mind trap. The entire game was never about what J.D. Vance was saying. It was about how many times she could force him to repeat himself, without him even noticing the pattern. The trick works like this. When you ask the same question twice, the brain automatically assumes the first answer wasn't good enough, so it rewrites the second answer slightly. But when you ask the same question 3 times in a row, the subconscious mind starts questioning if it accidentally exposed something without realizing it. That's exactly what Emily Rosen was trying to trigger, but J.D. Vance didn't blink. He answered the second time with the exact same words on, like a human mirror reflecting the game right back at her. That's when the real psychological warfare began. Emily Rosen's tone shifted, not enough for casual viewers to notice, but just enough to send a silent signal to J.D. Vance that he was now inside the trap. Her voice dropped half a pitch lower. She leaned forward by exactly 2 inches, invading his personal space without breaking eye contact. Then she asked the question for the 3rd time. What was the question? That's the part nobody was ever supposed to know. Every headline, every social media clip, every viral tweet about this interview always focused on J.D. Vance's final response. But the question itself was buried like a landmine beneath the surface of the entire story. Because the real operation happening inside that studio wasn't about getting information, it was about breaking his psychological rhythm in front of millions of people, without anyone realizing how it was happening. By the time Emily asked the question for the 4th time, J.D. Vance's breathing had changed. You can actually hear it if you replay the interview at 0.5 speed, a sharp exhale through his nose. That sound might seem tiny, but in the world of interrogation tactics it's known as the restraint tell, the body's automatic signal when someone is holding back an emotional reaction. Emily Rosen heard it too. That's exactly why she asked the same question one final time, 5 loops in total. Here's the part that nobody watching ever realized. The entire interview was a reverse-engineered psychological ambush. Emily Rosen was following a blueprint straight out of CIA manuals known as the confession spiral, where the target isn't forced to answer. They're forced to contradict themselves without ever understanding how it's happening. The whole trick works by creating invisible mental pressure, wrapping tighter and tighter, around the target's subconscious mind until they accidentally expose something they never meant to reveal. But J.D. Vance didn't break. Instead, he did something that flipped the entire operation backwards, something so subtle, 99% of viewers never even caught it. He leaned forward just half an inch, mirroring Emily's body language. That one microscopic movement was a silent signal in interrogation psychology, the alpha reversal. It's what interrogators fear the most, because it flips the predator into the prey without a single word being spoken. Emily Rosen blinked twice in rapid succession, another subconscious tell that her own rhythm had been broken without her even realizing it. That's the moment J.D. Vance delivered the line that would go viral across every corner of the internet. "I'm not going to play your little game." But here's the part nobody ever figured out. J.D. Vance wasn't just talking about the question. He was breaking the entire psychological spiderweb that had been built around him from the second the cameras started rolling. He knew exactly what game was happening, and he used one single sentence to turn the entire manipulation blueprint back on the manipulator. The second those words left his mouth, Emily Rosen froze. If you watch the footage closely, you can actually see her right hand twitch under the table, the same unconscious reflex interrogators experience when they've just lost control of the psychological battlefield. That's why she asked the question one last time, even though by that point she already knew the game was over. What nobody watching ever realized is that the entire viral clip was never supposed to happen. The whole plan was designed to break J.D. Vance silently, to create a headline without anyone ever knowing how the trick was pulled off. But J.D. Vance flipped the mirror backwards and trapped the trapper without anyone even seeing it happen. The burning question everyone was chasing was never supposed to be heard by the public. What happened between J.D. Vance and Emily Rosen might look like just another heated political interview on the surface, but the psychological mechanics behind that viral moment go far deeper than anyone realizes. Most people watching at home thought J.D. Vance simply shut down a pushy journalist, but according to experts in media manipulation, this entire encounter was something far more dangerous. Dr. Robert Lennox, a former behavioral analyst for the CIA, believes what happened in that studio was a textbook example of what's known as a layered compliance extraction operation, a mind control technique where the subject is forced to reveal hidden information without even realizing they're being manipulated. In an exclusive interview for this video, Dr. Lennox explained that the loop technique Emily Rosen used is straight out of black site interrogation manuals, but what makes this case even darker is how the trick was adapted for television without anyone ever noticing. According to Lennox, the trick works by planting invisible doubt inside the target's subconscious mind, not through aggression, but through artificial politeness. When a journalist repeats the same question multiple times, they're not actually looking for the answer. They're trying to destabilize the target's own confidence in what they've already said. The target starts questioning whether they accidentally gave something away without realizing it, and that self-doubt opens up invisible cracks in the mind where compliance can be extracted without force. But here's the part that makes this operation so chilling. According to leaked documents from former intelligence whistleblowers, these exact mind control techniques were first developed during the MKUltra program, the CIA's secret psychological warfare project from the 1950s. The goal was to create interrogation methods that could break a target's will without ever leaving physical evidence behind. Those methods were officially shut down decades ago. But what if they were simply repackaged for the media age? Dr. Lennox believes what we saw in that interview was a hybrid MKUltra mind trap, where traditional interrogation methods are fused with television production tricks to extract hidden confessions in plain sight, without the audience ever realizing what they're watching. If that's true, it means we're living in a world where mind control experiments never ended. They just moved from secret prisons into the newsrooms of mainstream media. But here's where the whole story flips inside out. J.D. Vance's counter-move, the alpha reversal, is something only a handful of experts in the world would even know how to pull off. According to ex-FBI interrogation specialist Brian McCauley, the only way to break out of a layered compliance extraction operation is to mirror the interrogator's body language without them realizing it. The entire game works on subconscious dominance hierarchies, and the second J.D. Vance leaned forward by half an inch, he silently flipped the whole hierarchy backwards without ever breaking eye contact. That one microscopic movement rewired the entire power dynamic in the room. which is why Emily Rosen's rhythm shattered in real time. What's even more terrifying is that this whole psychological blueprint has been hiding in plain sight for decades, buried inside declassified CIA manuals like Kubark and human resource exploitation training. Those documents spell out exactly how to use the loop technique to extract confessions without ever raising your voice. The only difference now is that those same mind games are being broadcast directly into millions of homes through perfectly scripted media interviews, disguised as simple conversations. But here's the million-dollar question nobody is asking. If J.D. Vance hadn't exposed the operation in real time, how many other politicians, celebrities, or whistleblowers have been broken by these same techniques without the public ever realizing it? How many viral interviews have been secretly engineered psychological operations, where the victim was forced into compliance while the whole world thought they were simply losing their temper? Brian McCauley believes this entire story is just the tip of the iceberg, a small crack in a much bigger machine that's been operating behind the scenes for decades. According to him, the only reason this interview went viral is because J.D. Vance accidentally exposed the software running underneath reality without even knowing he was doing it. If that's true, it means the only interviews that ever go viral are the ones where the manipulation blueprint failed. But there's still one burning question nobody has answered. What was the real question Emily Rosen kept asking? For the entire video, there's been one invisible question haunting the story from the shadows. What was the real question Emily Rosen kept asking J.D. Vance? The whole viral clip makes it seem like she was just pushing him about a political statement, but that's the surface layer, the layer designed for public consumption. What nobody noticed is that Emily Rosen's entire question sequence was built on a hidden linguistic cipher, a coded formula used in high-level interrogation circles to extract highly classified information without ever saying the real question out loud. According to leaked intelligence manuals from the NSA, this technique is known as the Phantom Inquiry Protocol, where the interrogator keeps asking a completely harmless question on the surface, while the true information they're extracting is buried underneath the sentence structure itself. Here's how it works. Every time Emily Rosen repeated the same question, the real information she was trying to extract shifted by exactly one layer deeper into the subconscious mind. The first time she asked, she was fishing for surface-level political statements. The second time, she was testing J.D. Vance's emotional rhythm. The third time, she was already inside his subconscious defense patterns, mapping out which topics made him flinch without him even realizing. By the fourth loop, she was extracting encrypted behavioral data directly from his involuntary micro-expressions, turning his own nervous system into an invisible confession device. This is where everything flips backwards. What if the entire point of that interview wasn't about what J.D. Vance said, but what he almost said without even knowing? According to former intelligence officers who've studied the clip frame by frame, Emily Rosen's real mission was never about political opinions. It was about mapping J.D. Vance's Truth Suppression Index, a secret data point used by intelligence agencies to measure how much hidden information a target is suppressing in real time. The part that should terrify every single person watching this video is that Phantom Inquiry protocols are designed to work on anyone, not just politicians. If they're using these techniques on senators live on television, how many of us have already been broken by the same mind games in everyday conversations without ever realizing it? How many social media interviews, viral podcasts, and reality TV confessionals have been secretly extracting encrypted subconscious data from millions of people, all while the entire world thought they were just watching entertainment? But here's the twist nobody saw coming. J.D. Vance never broke because he accidentally used a psychological counterweapon so rare, it doesn't even have an official name. Former intelligence operatives refer to it only by its code name, the Omega Mirror, a self-defense mechanism where the target intentionally corrupts their own behavioral data to make themselves invisible to mind control systems. The way J.D. Vance leaned forward by half an inch, the way he let those small pauses stretch out just a fraction of a second longer than necessary, those were microscopic glitches he was planting into the loop sequence, forcing the entire interrogation program to collapse in real time without anyone ever realizing why. But here's the final layer of the story, the layer nobody has even begun to consider. What if JD Vance wasn't resisting mind control? What if he was sending a message to anyone watching closely enough to decode it? Because if you go back and rewatch the clip, there's one moment, exactly 2 minutes and 37 seconds into the interview, where JD Vance glances directly into the camera for less than half a second. That one glance wasn't accidental. According to former cryptography experts, that exact timestamp aligns with a classified MKUltra training manual known as Document 23712, a manual describing how to break out of phantom inquiry protocols, using visual Morse code signals hidden in plain sight. If that's true, it means JD Vance didn't just survive the mind trap, he left a breadcrumb trail buried inside the interview for anyone smart enough to crack it. But what was the message? If everything you've just heard is true, it means we are living in a world where mind control experiments never ended. They simply evolved into something far more dangerous. What happened between JD Vance and Emily Rosen wasn't just a heated interview. It was a glimpse behind the curtain of how invisible psychological warfare is shaping the entire reality we live in, without anyone ever realizing it's happening. The real game isn't about politics or media narratives. It's about who controls the invisible battle happening underneath the surface of every conversation, every viral video, every headline you read without ever questioning why it made you feel a certain way. But the scariest part is how close this entire operation came to working without anyone noticing. If JD Vance hadn't deployed the Omega Mirror in real time, the entire world would have walked away from that interview, believing they had just witnessed a flustered senator losing his temper, never realizing they had just watched a mind control program malfunction live on air. How many other interviews have played out exactly like this, with the hidden interrogation blueprint working perfectly, extracting confessions from politicians, whistleblowers, or even regular people, without anyone ever seeing what was really happening? And if these mind games are happening on live television, what's stopping them from being embedded inside viral TikTok interviews, podcast confessionals, or even random street interviews that show up on your social media feed every single day? What if the entire content ecosystem we've all been consuming for years has been nothing but a massive behavioral data harvesting operation, wrapped inside the illusion of entertainment? But here's where everything gets even darker. The whole reason this story is going viral isn't because JD Vance exposed the trick, Mar. It's because he might have been sending a message to anyone smart enough to decode it. That glance into the camera at 2 minutes and 37 seconds, the one everyone ignored, might be the only proof we have that there are people inside the system who know exactly how the machine works, but they can't warn us directly. Which leaves just one question hanging in the shadows. If JD Vance cracked the code, who else is secretly playing the game? If you've made it this far, something inside you already knows this story isn't just about JD Vance. The whole system is built on the idea that 99% of people will never even notice the invisible game happening underneath their own reality. But the fact that you're still here means you're part of the 1%, the ones who can sense when something feels off, even if you can't fully explain why. But here's the truth nobody will ever tell you. Once you see the game, you can never unsee it. Most people will click away from this video and forget everything they just heard, because that's exactly how the system is designed to work. But a small handful of people will feel something stirring inside their mind right now, a quiet, haunting question they can't quite shake off. If you're one of those people, you'll find yourself coming back here without even knowing why. Scanning the comments, rewatching the clip, searching for clues you missed the first time, and the deeper you dig, the more you'll start to notice patterns hiding in plain sight, not just in this video but across everything you've ever watched, read, or listened to. That's how it starts. But once the question plants itself inside your mind, there's no way out. The only thing left to ask is, how many other stories are hiding inside the stories you've already seen?